Welcome back to Goldmark. We have a bit of an impromptu exhibition for you today. Our animated show was extraordinarily successful, but all good things must come to an end, so the pots have come down from the shelves. And we wondered what we could do with this space up here. We have found 101 prize pots by veteran potter Jim Malone to feed us in the meantime until our next exhibition. We have recently had snow here at the gallery. It's turned Uppingham very briefly into a little winter wonderland. So it's been lovely to get out into outside and enjoy some of the weather during this lockdown. Jim Malone's pots are a bit like that breath of fresh air of charging outside and feeling the freshness in the air, seeing the trees around you. There is a real beautiful, refreshing quality to his pots, and I think you'll see that as we go around this exhibition. Malone has been potting for nearly 50 years now. This is an exceptional career's worth of pots that we're seeing here today. He is a potter who is very much in the mould of Bernard Leach and Bill Marshall and Michael Cardew, veteran throwers who have been working in that Anglo-Oriental tradition for a number of years. So what we're going to see today are refined pots. They have a kind of maturity to them. This is not work that has been developed at random. This is a very slow, gradual evolution of forms you're going to see around us. There's a refined palette of glazes, a refined variety, a repertoire of forms here. This is work that's been slowly developed, added to, perfected over a number of years. It's really fantastic work, and I'm really looking forward to showing you. We'll dive straight in with this pot that's right next to me. As you'll see from a number of the pieces in this exhibition, Jim Malone is a potter who's drawing on a huge breadth of pottery traditions, of histories, of styles. We're going to start with this fantastic globular bottle because it's one of my favourites, and this particular form you'll see a couple of times in this exhibition. This is a pot really that's harking right back to Sung Dynasty Chinese pottery. That's pots from the 10th, 11th, 12th century AD. What you're seeing here though is a form that's not just a imitation of those pots from that time, but something that Jim has added to and developed into his own. You'll see this lovely band around the belly of this pot. That's an addition that Jim has made, that he's taken from medieval pots that he's seen himself to refine and perfect this silhouette. Pots with big rounded bellies like this are really difficult to pull off, especially when they're this size. It's very easy to find flat patches where the angle of the clay doesn't quite fill that beautiful cadence from the foot up to the neck, and that's something that Jim does beautifully. That's just evidence of 45, 50 years of practicing throwing daily, of really refining your technique. This one's in a beautiful Tenmoku glaze. It's a very old Chinese glaze that was then brought to Japan and Korea, and it's now a favourite among potters working in this country too. It's a very iron-rich glaze, and that's what gives it this beautiful deep black colour. But what's particularly lovely about Jim's Tenmoku is it really likes to break. On edges, on broad surfaces like this, you'll see that beautiful dark black breaking to this wonderful russet, rusty red. It's a really delightful colour combination. It's one that you don't often see outside of the world of pots, which makes it particularly special, I think. You might also notice, you can probably just make out up here in this next section, the slight undulations, the slight rhythms of pulling clay up with your fingers. This is a pot that's been thrown up to this next section here, and then this has been added on at the end. Malone is a big believer in something that I think Bernard Leach once said, which is think of pottery as drawing in 3 dimensions. You are pulling your fingers in one direction, up and down, and that line that you're creating is the form of the pot. Leach said, pay very close attention to the beginnings and ends of lines. This is the end of this pot's line up here with this beautiful neck, and I think Jim has said in the past that he likes that slight sign of the undulation, that slight kind of curvature that you get to the ribs of the neck as it's pulled up with the fingers. It shows that it's a pot that's been thrown, it's been made in a particular way. And it adds a lovely kind of vitality to this beautiful form, I think. We've actually got some more globular jars over here on this side of the exhibition. But as you see from these shelves that we're walking past to get to them, we're going to see a real variety of decorations, of glaze work. We've got some khaki pots here with beautiful wax resist, very much sort of in the style of Hamada and Bernard Leach. We've got more of that lovely rich Tenmoku over here. We've got porcelain work, we've got work with hakame on it, and iron brushwork. But let's come first to these big pots over here. So we have this large jar, much like the one that we've just seen, another in Tenmoku, that beautiful colour. Here you can see less of the breaking happening, so you've just got that beautiful, rich, black colour. And then up here, this pot with I think an ash and granite glaze. It's a particularly fluid glaze, and that's partly why Jim likes adding certain bits of decoration, like this beautiful incised design of this tree, maybe a willow tree here, and also these bands. These are the perfect areas to sort of catch glaze, that glaze can pool in if it's particularly fluid, like this one, or can catch and break. So you get this beautiful changing colour from this lovely, soft, dusty olive colour to this beautiful, deep, dark green, which is almost like glass. And then up here on this last one, hakame, lovely, rich and thick. Hakame is another pottery tradition that goes way back, hundreds of years, started in Korea. And the basis of it is a dark clay with a white slip brushed over the top, decoration added on top, and then a clear glaze to bring it all together. So what you're seeing in this exhibition as we go through are centuries old, sometimes 1,000-year-old techniques, traditions being brought to the modern day, making them feel fresh and lively and of now rather than of the past, of then. That's something that I think is very difficult to do, and it's very easy to take for granted. It's something that I don't think is appreciated enough in potters like Jim Malone, who are working within that tradition. It's very easy to fall back on the practices of the past without really making them feel new, making them feel like they have a place in people's lives today. But I think Jim Malone manages to capture that. There is enough variation going on, there's enough exploring different techniques that this really feels like pottery that can serve us today, that can give us something to nourish us. Malone works on a Korean style kick wheel. So a lot of the work that you're seeing here has been thrown. Working on a wheel like a kick wheel is very different from working on an electric wheel. It's taught Jim Malone an awful lot over the years. He has said in the past that what he likes about the rhythm of it is that every move that he has to make with the pots, every time he touches the clay, there has to be a purpose to it. With a kick wheel that's running on its own momentum, the momentum that you give it, every time you touch the clay it's going to slow down again. So if you want to be efficient with that movement, if you want to use the rhythms, that kind of swing, the natural pulse that a kick wheel has, you have to be very careful, you have to be really purposeful in every move that you make with the clay. It's a very quick way to teach you to know what you're doing when you're throwing. Far from the sort of that relentless rhythm of an electric wheel. And I think some of that rhythm is imparted into Jim Malone's pottery, particularly his bowls. There's very little trimming going on with Malone's work. It's very fresh. Bowl appears almost exactly as it would have done on the wheel. So it has that lovely kind of natural quality to it, like it's just been picked off put in the kiln and come straight out into our hands. We'll see some more of these different glazes going on. We've got some more ash glazes. What's particularly nice about the ash glaze in these bowls is the way it pools. And you get these beautiful glass patches on the bottom of some of these bowls. There's also, as I'm picking this one up, there's a lovely weight to Jim Malone's work. It's not too light, it's not too thin and mean. It has a kind of purposeful feel to it. It feels like this is a bowl that will sit in front of me and will serve me as I need, whether for mixing, as I'm baking or cooking, or for holding food on the table. It feels like it has a real presence, and that's both in the silhouette and in the feel, the kind of weight of the bowl. It's generous, I think. Malone has picked up a number of tricks and habits from that sort of world of Bill Marshall and the kind of that small studio production pottery. So as we come around this corner and we see some more different forms, different shapes of pots, we'll see the kind of breadth of forms that Malone is working in. Every time he comes to a new making cycle, he will make sketches of the pots that he would like to make, the different decorations, the different designs that he'd like to work with, maybe trials of new things that he's exploring. Making cycles can last from anywhere between 6 weeks and 2 months, so a pot that's made at the start of that, you might not remember by the end of it what glaze you wanted for it, what decoration you wanted for it. So it's a way of keeping track of what he's doing. It's also a way of slowly exploring new ideas, of letting new things come to you and letting them happen as they occur. And that's something that Malone has never been afraid of doing, and that's where the sort of the slow evolution, the sort of gradual change in his pots come from. You'll also see on a couple of these different pots the effects from his kiln. Now he works with a traditional 2-chambered kiln. It's part fired with oil and wood. Now what that does is it gives Malone real control over exactly what effects he wants to get from the firing. If he fired just with wood, he might not have as much control over where the fly ash is going, how much it's affecting the glazes that he's using. By combining it with oil, he has a sort of a very careful consideration for exactly how the quality of that firing is going to affect the pots. And that's also affected by things like the kind of fuel that he uses, pinewood fuel that has a beautiful long flame through the kiln. You'll see the effect of that firing on some of these pots. For example, this Tenmoku has a lovely kind of blush of grey and green to it. That's the kind of effect that you can only really achieve if you're working with wood. But it hasn't got the same kind of crusty feel that maybe working in a traditional anagama might. We've got a couple of different forms going on here. We've got some of these squared off bottles. They're not press moulded, they're thrown and then they're beaten with paddles to get that squared off shape, to get those 4 square faces. And they work really well with some of this beautiful brush decoration. We've got wax resist over here on this pot with a khaki glaze. And then iron brushwork with some little bits of copper glaze going on this Hakame bottle. This brushwork is something that Jim really likes, and I think he said before that it's an acquired taste, but a taste worth acquiring. It has a wonderful fluidity to it, and like the throwing, that's something that's come with practice. It's come with years of working in that kind of style. Getting to the point where you're confident enough that you can simply put your brush to the pot straight away and accept the marks that come off. We've also got a couple of jugs. We'll see some more of these around the exhibition. But Jim Malone is particularly known for his jugs that sort of draw on lots of these medieval style English forms. You can see some of the medieval influence on these jugs, these little sort of pelleted marks on the handles. But it's here really where we see pottery in all its splendour as sort of pure form, as the art critic Clive Bell once put it. Pottery has never quite been appreciated in the same way that sculpture has in this country. But really, when you're looking at pots like these, they're no different. This is working in form. This is working in that sort of sculptural language of feel and of volume and of shape and silhouette, of weight, the presence of something in the real world. The benefit of pottery, of course, is that we can use it. And these jugs are wonderful with flowers in, or for serving water, or dare I say ale for a big feast on a lovely kitchen table. I've just spotted a pot over my shoulder here, around the corner. We've got more of this beautiful thick hakame here. This is the pot that caught my eye. We saw one like this actually at the start of the exhibition with some flowers in it. This is a khaki vase. It's got this khaki glaze. It's almost like the opposite of the Tenmoku. It's normally this rusty red colour, but occasionally you get patches where this sort of black pierce through. With some wax resist brushwork that's been applied here, which has spared the clay from this glaze that's come over the top. What I particularly like about this form, though, is that it makes me think of something that Mike Dodd has also spoken about. And it's a bit like I was just mentioning, paying attention to the beginnings and endings of lines. Mike has always thought about the ends of his pots, the ends of bottles and vases and things, and that's something that I can tell Jim Malone has spent a lot of time thinking about. If we have a look at the different bottles throughout this exhibition, there are many that sort of curve in, those that flare out, those with sort of smaller necks that have been added, those with longer, taller necks you can see on some of these jars down here, these bottles down here. That little subtle difference, those little differences between things that have concavity and convex shapes, things flaring out and coming in, makes a real difference to the character of the pot. In the case of a vase like this, though, what I love about this slight flaring to this neck and this lovely squared shoulder here is that this pot realizes that what's completing its shape, what will complete its form, are the flowers that will inevitably fill it. You can see everything in the movement about this pot is driving up into this space up here. The lovely curve of this neck is going to be finished off by flowers up here. It's something that sort of Jim Malone probably never thought of, never consciously thought of, making vases like this. But it's something that, because he's working with forms that are established and tweaking them and refining them to his tastes, it's something that's sort of emerged in the making. That's what I really like about his pottery. Nothing feels forced, nothing feels overly designed or engineered. It's just slowly got to the point where it really works. Come along with me over here, and we've got some more wonderful functional pottery. A lot of the pots that Jim makes are for display, they're for showing in the home, they're for enjoying and contemplating. But there's also plenty of functional ware. These large bowls are absolutely fantastic for cooking with, for making pancake mix in particular. These are bowls that aren't going to go anywhere. They've got a wonderful heft to them, so they're not going to rock around on the table. They've got, I think, that beautiful sense of form, that sense of purpose and place on the table here. And again, as I showed earlier in that smaller bowl, these beautiful, beautiful pools of ash glaze in the middle of them. We've got a fantastic sculptural bread bin here as well. Working at size like this is not easy. The larger the pot is, the more the difficult problems of throwing pots are sort of compounded. And you'll see in a couple of the tall vases, in fact, if you come around this corner with me here, we've got a beautiful one here in this lovely thick nuka glaze with these Tenmoku pours. Throwing tall vases like this is a real challenge. The larger the pot is, the more difficult it is to sort of pull off for all the different shapes, for the cadences, for the rhythm of the pot from foot to base to sort of come through. Some of these taller vases, I think Jim throws in two pieces. Throws from the base first, and then the next half is sort of thrown inverted and then turned upside down, and the two halves are joined. You'll see that on some of these taller sort of vases that flare up towards the top. This has got a lovely, thick, rich nuka glaze on it. Nuka is a traditional Japanese glaze. It was traditionally made with rice husks, but really it's simply an ash glaze, and it's very high in silica. In fact, so high in silica that during the firing phase in the kiln, not all of it can melt because it's so sort of densely concentrated. So instead, that silica gets frozen within the glaze surface. That's what gives it this beautiful, thick, rich, creamy white quality. Now that's quite a technical description, and I'm sure it's even more complex when you really get down to the chemistry of it. But I love that idea of this being a pot that's actually a moment in time frozen. That this colour is not just the colour of a glaze, it's the colour of tiny things frozen in their place. That gets to the heart of the idea that these pots sort of tell their own story. There's a kind of a lovely history to their making. You can see this nuka actually over here on some of these pots, where it's been combined with this ash glaze. What I love about some of these pots is that Jim Malone is playing with the different qualities in his glazing to sort of bring out the shapes that he's been working with. So you've got this sort of drier glaze with the very runny nuka on top. And the lovely thing about nuka as well is that it starts to sort of have this effect where you get some of this blue colour coming in, this sort of chun quality almost to the glaze. Nuka is normally a sort of white creamy colour, but you'll see on some of these pots that it has more of a kind of olive overtone to it that's quite similar to the ash glaze. That's because Jim's added a particular stone, an iron-bearing stone, to give it that quality. And it just means that these two different glazes kind of marry really beautifully together. I think they look almost like sort of shawls over the shoulders of these pots. Or maybe even blankets of snow, given the weather we've just been having. Here's some more of these tall vases I was just talking about. They're a fantastic opportunity for Jim to play with things like pouring glazes. So you've got some of these nuka pours that have come down here to give this lovely fluid effect. But also taller shapes for different kinds of decoration. You can see some of these combed incisions that have been made right into the clay with a tool. They've got a lovely kind of rough quality to them. You can really feel the body of the clay that this pot's been made from. They just sort of quietly accentuate that sculptural form that typifies all of Malone's pots. Speaking of tools, I'm going to take you over to this shelf because we can see a real variety of the different decorative techniques that Jim Malone uses. So over here we've got more pours. We've got Tenmoku on this nuka. It's given this Tenmoku a beautiful, rich colour here. And then on a pot like this, one of Jim's favourite things are these copper pours on Tenmoku. What's particularly nice about this is that the copper, which has this lovely green colour from the metal, is a lovely sort of counter to this rusty red colour that you get in the Tenmoku where it breaks. That sort of lovely colour complement going on there. But elsewhere we can see more of the decorative techniques. We've got pelleting. This is very sort of typical of medieval pots. So you'll see it a lot on these lovely medieval style jugs. But you'll also see Jim combining it with some of the forms, the sort of Chinese and Korean forms that he's been working with. So there's a real mixing, a real melting pot of ideas coming together in these pots, even though these different decorative techniques seem to sit well with each other, despite coming from traditions thousands of miles apart. We've also got banding, fluting on some of these vases. This has been made with a tool that Jim's made himself using banding wire. This is lovely because it gives these little raised edges, the edges of the fluted marks, where the glaze breaks away and then pools in the trough of these little valleys that have been cut into the shape of the clay. I think Jim has spoken before actually about that being one of the nicest things about pottery, about being a studio potter, is you've got the time to explore making your own tools, finding your own marks, finding your own vocabulary in decoration. So you can see Jim's is fairly refined. There's not too much going on here. Every mark has got purpose. It's got a reason to be there, a design that breaks up the shape or accentuates the form that he's got in front of him. But that's one of the nice things that he's found about pottery making, is finding your own voice, your own story in the tools that you make and the way that you work in your studio. So we come to these last shells. We've got more of this beautiful hakame, even more sparse actually on some of these pots. The brush marks are more obvious, particularly with this sort of these simple brushes with the white slip. And then down here we've got a porcelain bottle. Porcelain, particularly hard to throw with. It's a slippery, very fiddly, mischievous clay. To be working with tall forms like this is really quite difficult. So this is a really beautiful example of Jim's work in porcelain. But we've also come to my favourite bottle in the whole exhibition, I think, and that's this magnificent, tall Tenmoku bottle with this beautiful mossy copper green pour, which almost looks like sort of verdant growth, sort of like a tree, or the moss on an old tree that's sort of hanging down from its upper branches. I think the form on this pot is absolutely perfect. You can see some of the throwing lines here from where the clay's been drawn up. We've got this lovely band that just divides the form up, cuts it up so that it's not just a sort of a single face. This lovely Tenmoku glaze, which is, I think I've said before, one of my very favourite glazes. I was trying to think of a metaphor for how Jim Malone works, that kind of slow evolution, that slowly coming to terms with what it is that you like and don't like, that removing all that's inelegant and unnecessary. And it came to me that Jim Malone, a potter like Jim Malone, is a bit like a river. It starts off small with a stream, a kind of babbling brook. But slowly over time, it cuts its own path, it widens its banks, it rolls out all the detritus, the obstacles in front of it. And while the flashier and the more trendy and the more of its moment ceramic work is going on, nobody's quite aware of this river quietly cutting its swathe, its path through the countryside. That's sort of what Jim Malone has been doing. He's been quietly carving his voice out in the world of pots for the last 4-5 decades. And what a voice it is. I hope you've enjoyed seeing these 101 prize pots. If they don't all sell in the next week, I'm sure we'll return to some of them and have a look at some of them in more detail. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed this impromptu walkthrough.